questions. As we mentioned before, that this is one of the teaching methods that Jesus used, either in response to questions that were asked of him or just in general, that questions that he would ask in order to get people to think and to get some response from them. And so today the question involves the law. The question of the law or the question of grace. We're going to be talking about law and grace. Two things that pretty much cover the whole Scriptures. We oftentimes refer to the Old Testament as the age of the law, and then we refer to the New Testament as the age of grace. But sometimes we get these two mixed up, and so today I just want to spend some time talking, first of all, about the law. What the law is all about, how we understand law. And then we'll talk about some of the problems with the law and some of the problems that Jesus ran into. And then how do we fit the law in with this concept of God's grace, with the grace of God, the love of God. So we're going to start with a question about the law. And the first thing I want to say about the law is that we like laws. We really do appreciate having laws, don't we? Laws are important. And whatever I say today, I'm not disparaging the fact that we need to have laws. It's how we deal with laws. It's how we understand them. But I would like to start by saying that we all love law. We love law. And there are many examples of this that I could give you. I'm going to start with just a couple. But we have a real interest in the law of the Old Testament for some reason. And you'll find this from many people. But why is it that we have this interest in law? Well, one of the reasons, first reason that we like the law, or we love the law, is that it allows us to do something for ourselves. Now, what do I mean by this? Well, when we someday arrive at the pearly gates and St. Peter meets us there, what do you think St. Peter is going to say to us? What we probably would like St. Peter to say to us is something like this: "Well done, good and faithful servant. You did a good job, and you have earned everything that you're going to receive. And because of how hard you worked, and because of how hard you strove to do what was right, because of what you did, and it's all because of what you did, you get to come into heaven." And we're going to say, "Oh, isn't that wonderful? I did it." We like to think that we did it. We like to think that whatever we have is ours because I earned it. We like to think that whatever glory we get, we deserve. I want to be able to say that I did it. It's just a part of our human nature. That's why we have such a hard time receiving gifts. We want to be able to earn what we have. We want to be able to say, I did it. Now imagine coming up to the pearly gates and St. Peter meets you at the pearly gates and he looks at you and says, "You know what? You're a lousy piece of scum. You really messed up on earth. But you know what? God loves you anyway. Come on in." Well, we'd probably be relieved. But there's just something about that idea that it was free and we didn't earn it that kind of just grades at us. That's why we like the law, because the law gives us an opportunity to judge whether we're doing or earning what we deserve. Okay? So that's one thing I think about law, is it gives us a sense of earning. It gives us a sense of structure. It gives us parameters. It's nice to know that when I drive from here to St. Cloud and I get on 23, that I can go, how many miles per hour, Bill? 100, okay. That I can go 55 miles an hour until I get to Richmond. Then I can step on it and I can go 65, I think. Anyway, once in a while you'll hear maybe they'll have a state trooper on WCCO radio and they'll have a call in, and somebody's always going to call and ask the question, "Officer, when the speed limit says 70, how much over the speed limit can I go and still be legal?" Well, isn't 70 legal? But you know, they're not going to stop you at 75. So how about 76? How about 77? Can I stretch it to 80 and still be okay? We want to know those things. We want to know what the parameters are So we know when we're doing good and when we're not doing good. We need to know that. And so the law gives us some of those parameters. The law kind of gives us those parentheses. This is it. This is how far you can go. And you can't go any further. So we like the law for that reason as well. So we like the law because it helps us to feel good about, I did it. It gives us some structure. The law helps me measure myself against others. I love that part of it. I can measure myself against you. When I see your name in the paper for doing something wrong, I can say, at least I didn't do that. At least I'm better than that. When I watch the news and I hear reports of people who did this or that, they got caught with selling drugs, or they beat somebody up, or they murdered somebody, and I can sit back and say, at least I'm not as bad as that person. So the law, the understanding of what's right and what's wrong, that gives me some sense of comfort, because I'm never as bad as the worst person. There's always somebody worse than me. And that gives me comfort to know that I'm a good person. The law helps me to establish the fact that I'm a good person. And then fourthly, the law, as I already it tells us what's right and wrong. I like to know what's right and wrong. I like to know what's fair in life. And so the law gives me some sense of fairness. And so for all these reasons, we enjoy the law. We appreciate the law. And for many of those reasons, oftentimes as Christians, we get stuck in the Old Testament and the law of the Old Testament, and trying to understand what the law is all about, and trying to understand how that law applies to us. So I want to talk a little bit now about the Old Testament laws, and talk about their purpose, and talk about some of the problems that the law presents to us. First of all, there are different kinds of laws in the Old Testament. The law of the Old Testament, what we call the law, is usually what we consider to be contained in Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. The law is that which Moses went up on Mount Sinai to receive from God, and he brought down and presented to the Israelites. We think of the Ten Commandments, but of course the law was much broader than just the Ten Commandments. The important thing to remember is that Moses brought them down for the Israelites. We'll talk about that in just a few moments. But what were some of the laws that Moses brought down for the Israelites? A portion of the laws are what we might call ceremonial laws. These are laws that involved how to worship. They involved how to build the tabernacle, or ultimately the temple that people would worship in. They involved the offerings that people were to bring, the kinds of cereal offerings and animal offerings and such that people were to bring. They involved the laws about the priesthood and who could or couldn't be a priest, and how they were to dress and how they were to act in their official capacity. There were laws about sacrifice, about the sacrifice of animals, and all of that entailed. And so these were all what we call ceremonial laws, and none of which apply to us. In fact, in the Jewish faith of the 21st century, most Jews would say they don't apply to them either. These are something that are of the past. There's no temple anymore, and so all those ceremonial laws are no longer in effect. They no longer sacrifice animals. They no longer bring their grain offerings. They don't have priests. They have rabbis. So all these laws don't apply. They certainly don't apply to us as Christians. The second set of laws, or another grouping of laws, might be called the purity laws. And I'm going to talk a little bit more in just a moment about the reason why there were purity laws, but these were laws that involved what a woman could do or couldn't do during her monthly cycle, what you did in your house when you got mold on the walls, what a person did with leprosy on their skin, all the kosher laws, which I want to talk about a little bit in a moment. All these were what we call purity laws, and these were laws. Well, I'll talk about that when I get into purpose. The last set of laws we might call the moral laws. And the purity laws, again, by the way, don't apply to us. I'll explain that in a few moments. The moral laws are a little more difficult because we understand that many of the moral laws do apply to us. And these are laws that are contained in areas such as the Ten Commandments. Don't kill, don't steal, don't lie, and all those kinds of laws we might call the moral laws. And we'll talk about those in just a few moments. So what was the purpose of the law? Ultimately, overall, The purpose of the law, and again, I want to emphasize that the law was given to a specific people at a specific time. These were people called the Israelites, sometimes referred to as the Hebrews. And these are the people to whom the law was given. And the law, first and foremost, was meant to create out of these Israelites a pure and holy nation of people who would be different from all the rest of the people in the world. And God wanted these people to be separate from the rest of the world. And many of the laws were meant to separate them. So I'll go back to the purity laws. The laws, let's take, for instance, the kosher laws. Why did God have all these dietary laws about what they could or couldn't eat? You know, certain things that if you're a kosher Jew to this day, you refrain from. You don't eat ham. You don't eat certain kinds of shellfish. You don't mix meat and milk. And there's all these regulations about eating kosher. And the question would be, well, why these laws? And people have written all kinds of books about, because it's a healthier diet or this or that or the other thing. But ultimately, the reason God gave the Israelites kosher laws was to force them to separate themselves from the rest of the cultures around them. You couldn't eat kosher and intermingle with other people very well. It was hard to go out for a meal with your neighbor who was a Gentile on a Friday night because you just didn't know exactly what they were going to serve. What if they served ham sandwiches? What if when a person has a kosher, or is going to be kosher, you may be aware of this, but in a strict Jewish home today, if a family is going to be kosher, they have to have two kitchens. You have to build two kitchens in your house. You have to have a meat kitchen and a dairy kitchen. We've taken kids to synagogue one time when we were at Temple Aaron in St. Paul. They took us into the kitchen and showed us. They had a line down the middle, and here's our meat kitchen, and here is our dairy kitchen. And you didn't dare take a spoon from one kitchen and put in the other kitchen, because if it had touched meat, it was not allowed to touch dairy products. So you want to be very strict about that. Well, if you're being that strict about your diet, it's really hard to go out and intermingle with your neighbors if you're going to be kosher. To this day, it would be very hard. If you were Jewish and you were going to abide by the kosher laws, it would be very hard for you to even now, to go out and have dinner at your neighbor's house. Because you just don't know. What if the spoon that your neighbor, who's Gentile, was using to stir something with dairy products was used then to touch meat? See, and you can't use a spoon like that. So anyway, the kosher laws, as well as many of the purity laws, and many of the laws that were set by Moses for the Israelites, were meant to separate Israel. They just couldn't intermingle very well and be faithful to those laws. The Sabbath law was another law, even in the Jewish tradition, and all the way back to Moses. Sabbath started on, does anybody know? Friday night at sundown, and it lasts until Saturday night sundown. To this day in Israel, they have some strict laws about what can be open and what can't be open on Shabbat or Sabbath. And at Friday night, everything closes on the Jewish quarters, the Jewish areas. So that was another thing that separated them from their neighbors. Nobody else around them had to do that. Nobody else had to quit working on Sabbath, on Saturday. And so that would separate them as well. So one of the purposes of the law was given specifically. It wasn't given to everybody. You can see, here's the problem. If the law of kosher was for everybody, and everybody ate kosher, then the Jewish people, the Israelites, would have no reason to separate themselves. God wanted them separate. He wanted a separate and holy nation. And so he gave them laws that would force them to be separate. These laws were not meant for everyone. These laws were meant for a specific people, the Israelites. So that was the main purpose of the law, was to